Bikini Bottom had always been a lively place, full of cheerful neighbors, silly adventures, and the ever-present laughter of its most enthusiastic resident, SpongeBob SquarePants. But lately, something about him had changed. The energy that once radiated from him like sunshine was gone. His laugh, once infectious, had faded into eerie silence. And his friends were starting to notice. Sandy Cheeks was the first to voice her concerns. She had always known SpongeBob as an overly joyful sponge, one who was always ready with a smile and a song. But now, his smiles felt unnatural, his eyes colder than the deep sea. She had tried to talk to him, to ask if everything was okay, but his responses had been unsettling. He would grin too widely, his mouth stretching beyond what seemed possible, and his silence would linger longer than it should. Squidward tentacles, though often irritated by SpongeBob's enthusiasm, couldn't ignore the shift either. SpongeBob wasn't annoying him anymore, not in the usual way. The daily routines had stopped. No cheerful greetings at 6 a.m. No desperate invitations to jellyfishing. No singing behind the grill. Instead, SpongeBob had grown disturbingly quiet, his movements precise, his gaze lingering too long. Squidward, for the first time, felt a sense of dread toward his usually insufferable neighbor. Patrick Star had the most chilling encounter. He had seen SpongeBob the day before and asked him if he wanted to go jellyfishing, like they always did. But SpongeBob had simply stared at him, unblinking, unmoving. And then he spoke, but it wasn't his voice. It was deep, almost inhuman, reverberating like something not meant for this world. "Not today," he had said. Patrick had laughed it off at first, assuming SpongeBob was just in a bad mood. But then he noticed SpongeBob's eyes. They weren't their usual bright blue. They were black, completely, soullessly black. When Sandy brought up her concerns to Mr. Krabs, the old crab brushed it off. He believed SpongeBob was simply overworked, exhausted from the long hours at the Krusty Krab. After all, the boy never took a break, never complained. Maybe he just needed rest. But Squidward and Sandy weren't convinced. Something was wrong, deeply wrong, and they feared what would happen if they didn't figure it out soon. That evening, something even more bizarre happened. Mr. Krabs was just getting home, and there he was, SpongeBob, already at his place, in the dark, waiting for him. Mr. Krabs asked him what he was doing in his house, and then SpongeBob told him it was his turn. Mr. Krabs didn't understand what he meant by it was his turn, and then SpongeBob told him how he had killed Patrick, Sandy, and Squidward. "What?" Mr. Krabs said nervously. Mr. Krabs felt a chill crawl up his shell. At first, he didn't want to believe it. But the way SpongeBob spoke, so casually, so calmly, sent waves of terror through him. He had killed them. And he didn't regret it. When Mr. Krabs pressed him for a reason, SpongeBob explained, in horrifying detail, why he had done it. Squidward had always hated him, treated him with nothing but scorn no matter how hard SpongeBob tried to make him happy. So he had silenced him, permanently. Patrick, his so-called best friend, had never been truly independent. He relied on SpongeBob for everything, unable to do a single thing on his own. SpongeBob had grown tired of carrying his weight. Sandy, the intelligent scientist, had always looked down on him as if he were nothing more than a simple-minded fry cook. He had resented that condescending attitude, so he had taken her down as well. Mr. Krabs was horrified. He tried to reason with SpongeBob, to remind him of their bond, of the years they had spent together. He had given SpongeBob a job, a purpose. But SpongeBob only laughed. A cold, empty laugh. Mr. Krabs had never cared for him, not truly. He had only valued him for his work, for the money he brought in. SpongeBob had spent years slaving away at the grill, thinking he was part of something bigger. But in the end, he was just a tool. A replaceable worker. But not anymore. Now, he had taken control. Mr. Krabs, in sheer desperation, offered anything to be spared: raises, money, even a share of the Krusty Krab's profits. But SpongeBob wasn't interested in money. He had never been. He wanted something else now. SpongeBob killed him, just like the others. And it didn't end there. He moved through Bikini Bottom with the same twisted smile, leaving no one behind: Larry the Lobster, Mrs. Puff, Pearl, Plankton, even Gary. No one saw him coming, and no one had a chance to escape. By dawn, Bikini Bottom was no longer a bustling underwater paradise. It was a graveyard. And in the destruction, SpongeBob stood, taking pleasure in the chaos he had unleashed. He finally felt free: no more demands, no more expectations, no more fake friendships. Just him, alone in a silent, empty world. Once upon a time, in a vast and beautiful kingdom where fairy tales were woven into the very fabric of existence, there was a girl named Cinderella. The world knew her as the gentle, kind-hearted maiden who had suffered under the cruelty of her wicked stepmother and stepsisters, only to be lifted from despair by the grace of her enchanting fairy godmother. It was a story whispered through generations, a tale of hope and magic, of suffering and salvation. But what the world did not know was that fairy tales, no matter how sweet, could twist into nightmares far worse than anyone could imagine. The story the world knew ended with Cinderella slipping her delicate foot into the fabled glass slipper, with the handsome prince sweeping her into his strong arms, with a happily ever after sealed by the sound of ringing wedding bells and whispered vows of love. However, when Cinderella became queen, her true colors slowly started to show, unraveling like a thread pulled loose from a tapestry. She was not satisfied with merely sitting beside the prince as his loving wife. She didn't want to share the throne with a man at all. So, she did the only thing she could to claim the throne for herself and eliminate the one obstacle in her way. One quiet, moonlit night, she prepared a fragrant cup of tea for the prince, laced with a poison so potent it worked within minutes. What the prince didn't know, what he could never have imagined, was that his beloved wife had already decided his fate. After taking a single sip, he began coughing violently, his body trembling, blood spilling from his lips in thick, crimson streams. His breaths grew shallow, desperate. Within minutes, the once powerful prince was dead. His death was swift and merciless. As his blood seeped deep into the silken sheets of their grand marriage bed, Cinderella did not shed a single tear. She stood at the foot of the bed, her expression unchanging, watching as the last spark of life drained from his horrified eyes. And she felt nothing. No sorrow, no regret. Only a dark, triumphant satisfaction. The kingdom mourned deeply. They wept bitterly for their fallen prince, for the ruler they had adored, a man who had been strong, just, and kind. But Cinderella? She stepped forward without hesitation, her voice steady and unwavering, her presence commanding the court's full attention. The widowed queen, still young and breathtakingly beautiful, stood before the morning kingdom and declared her rule. There would be no king to replace the one she had lost. No husband to stand beside her, no man to take power from her hands. She would rule alone, as she had always intended. And so began the reign of Queen Cinderella. Her first act as ruler was one of cold, calculated vengeance. She had not forgotten the ones who had made her suffer, the wretched women who had mocked her tears, who had torn apart every shred of happiness she had ever known. Her stepmother and stepsisters had watched in silent horror as she ascended the throne, perhaps expecting mercy, hoping for forgiveness. But Cinderella was no longer the weak, weeping girl they had tormented without a second thought. She sent her royal guards to seize them, their ironclad boots echoing ominously through the grand halls of the palace. They were dragged, kicking and screaming, to the castle. And then, without hesitation, she ordered their execution. Their terrified screams, filled with raw, helpless agony, echoed through the castle walls, chilling those who heard them to the bone. There was no mercy, no redemption, no hope for salvation. Their lifeless bodies were tossed onto the streets like discarded trash, left there as a warning, a brutal testament to the fate of those who dared to wrong their queen. The once bright, lively kingdom fell into an eerie, unnatural silence. Music and laughter faded, replaced by hushed whispers and fearful glances. The people walked the cobblestone streets with their heads lowered, their voices barely above a murmur, terrified of what would happen if they were heard speaking against the queen. Cinderella's rule was absolute. She governed with an iron grip, her word was law, and her gaze alone was enough to send men trembling to their knees. Fear became the foundation of her reign. She did not seek the love of her people, for love was weak, fleeting, and unpredictable. Love could be broken, twisted, and lost. But fear was eternal. Fear kept the people in line, fear silenced rebellion before it could even take root. She made gruesome examples of those who dared to defy her, ordering their heads displayed on spikes outside the castle walls for all to see. When the fairy godmother heard of the horrors Cinderella had inflicted upon the kingdom, of how she now ruled with cold, ruthless fear, she immediately traveled to the castle, hoping to save the girl she had once blessed. Cinderella, standing tall on her throne, was pleased to see the fairy godmother. After all, it was because of her magic that Cinderella had risen to such heights. But the fairy godmother had not come to offer praise. She had come to reason with her, to remind her of the kind-hearted, selfless girl she had once been. But that girl no longer existed. She had been burned away, reduced to nothing but ashes, never to return. The fairy godmother's eyes filled with grief as she realized the full extent of Cinderella's transformation. This was no longer an innocent maiden who had suffered unjustly, this was a queen who had embraced the darkness within her, who had abandoned her humanity for power, who had erased every trace of the past because cruelty was the only thing that had ever made her feel truly strong. She pleaded with her, begged her to remember who she had been, hoping there was still some fragment of goodness left hidden beneath the cruelty. But Cinderella did not hesitate. The past was dead to her. The girl who had once scrubbed floors until her hands bled, who had cried in the attic late at night, who had clung to childish dreams of a better life, that girl had been weak. That girl had been powerless. And she would never be weak again. Cinderella gave the fairy godmother a simple choice: stand beside her, embrace the kingdom she had built, or stand against her and suffer the inevitable consequences. But there was no hesitation in the fairy godmother's heart. She could never condone this darkness, could never stand idly by while the girl she had once loved ruled through fear and bloodshed instead of kindness. And Cinderella had expected nothing less. There was no place for those who opposed her. No room for weakness. She had built her empire on strength and terror, and she would not allow anyone, even the woman who had once granted her magic, to stand in her way. She ordered her guards to seize the fairy godmother, but before they could lay a hand on her, she vanished in a brilliant shimmer of golden magic. Enraged, Cinderella sent her guards across the land, searching every village, every forest, every hidden alley where whispers of rebellion might take root. They scoured the land with torches, their swords gleaming under the moonlight, but no matter how many doors they kicked down, no matter how many people they threatened, they could not find her. The fairy godmother had disappeared, protected by powerful magic, an echo in the wind, a shimmer in the dark. Yet, Cinderella's reign of terror had only just begun. The ocean had once been Moana's greatest ally, guiding her, calling her, choosing her. She had been the hero of Mutunui, the one who restored the heart of Te Fiti and saved her world from ruin. But something had changed. A darkness had settled inside her, a voice whispering to her in the dead of night, weaving its way into her thoughts. It had started as a murmur, something faint and almost indistinguishable from the rustling of the palm trees or the soft crash of the waves against the shore. But the longer she ignored it, the louder it became. It called to her, beckoning her toward the sea, urging her to listen. At first, she resisted, convincing herself it was only a dream, a figment of her imagination. But the pull was relentless, an invisible tide dragging her forward, leaving her helpless to fight against it. By the second night, she could no longer ignore the compulsion. It was not just a voice anymore, it was a force, a presence that commanded her to obey. And so, long after her village had fallen asleep, she took her boat and sailed away from Motunui, her destination unknown even to herself. The ocean, once playful and gentle beneath her touch, seemed different. The water felt colder, the waves more restless. It no longer guided her as it once had, instead, it moved away, reluctant to follow. The stars above flickered in and out, as though warning her to turn back. But she did not. She pressed on, drawn forward by something stronger than fear. She reached Te Fiti by dawn. The island was as she had left it, lush, peaceful, untouched by darkness. But the moment her feet touched the shore, something shifted. The wind stilled. The trees seemed to lean away from her. Even the birds, which usually filled the air with their songs, had gone silent. And there it was, the heart of Te Fiti, glowing softly where it belonged. Her breath came in uneven gasps as she stared at it. She had placed it there once before, restoring life to the world. She had done what was right. Yet, the longer she looked at it, the stronger the voice became, urging her forward, promising her something she did not fully understand but already craved. She stepped closer. Her fingers trembled as they reached out, hovering over the stone, the pulsing warmth almost welcoming. A final whisper echoed in her mind, sweet and persuasive. And then, she took it. The moment her fingers curled around the heart, the world shifted. A surge of energy flooded through her, filling every part of her being, burning away everything she had once known. It was unlike anything she had ever felt, powerful, intoxicating, and utterly consuming. It did not just course through her, it became her. She gasped as it fused with her very soul, sinking into her chest, embedding itself within her. The island trembled. The sky above darkened, the stars winking out one by one. The ocean recoiled, waves pulling away from the shore as if trying to escape her presence. The vibrant green of Te Fiti's land began to wither, the flowers shriveling, the trees twisting into unnatural shapes. The air grew thick with something heavy and suffocating, something that felt ancient and wrong. Then came the pain. It spread through her like fire, clawing up her arms, burning its way into her veins. She staggered back, clutching her chest as the heart pulsed violently within her. Her reflection in the water distorted, shifting into something unrecognizable. Her once bright brown eyes darkened, flickering with something red and unnatural. Her skin, once warm with life, took on a sickly pallor, veins of black energy snaking beneath its surface. She was no longer Moana of Motunui. She was something else. Something greater. The land of Motunui suffered first. The moment she stepped foot on its shores, the once vibrant island began to decay. The waves that had once brought life now churned violently, filled with an unsettling darkness. The trees blackened, their leaves withering under an unseen force. The villagers, sensing the shift, grew uneasy, watching in silent horror as the girl they once knew walked among them as something entirely different. When Maui found out what Moana had done, he immediately transformed into his hawk form and flew straight to Motunui. But the moment he saw her, he knew something was wrong. The way she carried herself was different, her movements too controlled, too precise, as if she were calculating her every step. The air around her felt charged, unnatural. The ocean, which had once danced to her presence, now kept its distance, as if afraid. Then, he saw her eyes. And he knew. The heart of Te Fiti no longer rested on the goddess's island, it was within Moana. And it had twisted into something else. Something dark. Maui, desperate to stop what was happening, tried to reason with her, to remind her of who she was. But she did not listen. The voice inside her was louder, stronger than anything else. She did not need to be Moana of Motunui. She did not need to be a simple girl who restored balance. She was more than that. She was power itself. The ocean obeyed her command now, but not in the way it once had. It did not nurture or protect. It destroyed. She raised her hand, and the tide rose with it, swelling higher and higher, looming over the island like a living entity. The villagers screamed, fleeing in terror as the waters crashed down, swallowing everything in their path. The earth split beneath her feet, the land shaking violently as the darkness inside her spread. By the time the sun rose again, Motunui was no more. The island lay in ruins, its people scattered or lost to the sea. The ocean, which had once carried Moana to adventure, now carried destruction in her wake. The balance she had once fought to protect had been shattered. And she did not care. She had always longed to know who she was meant to be. Now, she knew. She was no longer the girl who restored the heart of Te Fiti. She was its ruler. And the world would bow to her will.